Over the Garden Wall is Cartoon Network's first miniseries and is an Emmy Award-winning 10-episode series that aired from November 3rd to November 7th in 2014. The show focuses on two brothers, Wirt and Greg, voiced by Elijah Wood, whom you might recognize as Frodo Baggins from the Lord of the Rings franchise, and Colin Dean, who has lent his voice to Lincoln Loud of the Loud House on Nickelodeon. Wirt and Greg are two lost brothers wandering the woods trying to make their way home, as they are accompanied by a talking bluebird named Beatrice and meet many friendly and not-so-friendly faces on their journey. Each episode explores a different part of these unknown woods, ranging from an old-timey schoolhouse built to teach animals, to a tavern full of eccentric, quirky characters, to even a frog fairy, all in just 11 minutes each episode. And let me tell you, it does its job well. From the first time I watched the show up until today, I've watched the show countless times and gushed on and on about it countless more. It might be my favorite animated series, and maybe even my favorite series period. Sorry, Gravity Falls. It can be upbeat and comedic, but it can also be chillingly mysterious. It's lighthearted, but it's also a dark and deep examination of the relationships these characters have with one another, and how, once consumed by darkness, it can blind us all. Alright, I don't mean literally, but in a sense. Anyways, to further examine Over the Garden Wall and what makes it so special to so many, you have to dive into the craft, the creators, and influences that allows this miniseries to resonate with those who have watched it for years to come. And minor spoiler warning ahead. Over the Garden Wall encapsulates this warm autumn vibe to it, with the setting taking place during the fall season and in a forest. We see this change later in the series to a winter storm due to a change in tone, pacing, and seriousness of the plot. Art director Nick Cross wanted to go all out with his ideas and designs. Since he was working on a mini-series and not a full-length show, it would allow for more opportunities for Cross to consistently keep an in-depth design the way he wanted. Over the Garden Wall draws from many different art styles and can't exactly be pinpointed onto one inspiration for the whole production, as much as the show feels like a mixture between early 20s and 30s classic cartoon and contemporary animation, like Adventure Time, which Over the Garden Wall creator Patrick McHale was a creative director on, or Regular Show or Gravity Falls, whose creators McHale also worked with in the past. He was influenced by the works of Up Iwerks, who created this Flip the Frog animation, a big inspiration for the first shot of the entire show, in which you see a frog playing the piano and spinning into frame. Up Iwerks worked with Walt Disney to come up with the iconic character of Mickey Mouse. He was even the one responsible for the very first Mickey animation, Steamboat Willie. Hard to believe? Look at the title card. None other than Up Iwerks himself. Patrick McHale and his team of animators also felt heavily inspired by Max Fleischer and those at Fleischer Studios, who created characters like Betty Boop and Popeye. You can even see this inspiration in the 4th episode when we meet the tavern keeper.
Ooh, better beware. Ooh, the beast is out there.
I'm not one of the greedy kind. All of my wants are simple. I know what's on my mind.
That's enough about the art though. Let's move on to the story and the characters. Elijah Wood described the show by saying, "If this show were a record, it would be played on a phonograph." A phonograph, one of the earliest forms of recording and reproducing sounds, has the ability to take in vibration waveforms and reproduce the vibrations recorded to playback sound. Pat McHale took influence from stories like Alice in Wonderland and The Wizard of Oz, where a protagonist gets lost and finds themselves in a fantasy world filled with strange beings they would have never imagined and are set on a journey to find their way home. He plays back these iconic stories and gives them an old-timey feel. much like how listening to this recording being played back on a phonograph will give you feelings of nostalgia for a time period you may have never even lived in. Much effect coming from aforementioned early 20th century animation influences and overall different influential pieces and figures dating all the way back to the 17th century. One of the clearest influences cast on the show is the influence of Romanticism, the late 18th century literary movement that shaped writing by putting a spotlight on the individual. Over the Garden Wall exemplifies supernatural imagery, a theme that is very popular within Romanticism, as shown through the personification of many creatures and the spirits and monsters that are very real in this fantasy world. Romanticism is also shown through Foyle's Wirt and Greg. As a celebration of the individual, the show displays an emphasis on intuition and feeling that Greg seems to have over the logic and reason that Wirt desperately tries to prevail with. And speaking of characters, a final theme of Romanticism that Over the Garden Wall displays is the reverence and awe of the innocence of childhood. Greg is a shining example of this, when not only is he treated like a naive child who doesn't know better than to act silly while lost, but his outlook on the situations they are put through is that of an innocence natural to the preservation of childhood. This gives way for tons of comic relief, but it also allows for deep takes from a different viewpoint that shows the topics discussed from an alternative lens. This show very much is about death, and even the unknown can be described as a sort of afterlife. In the official Art of Over the Garden Wall book, it states, "The unknown is the place between life and death, between dreams and reality." Greg is able to take this kind of topic with such a heavy tone, allowing those watching to follow. Sometimes a simpler way of looking at life is better than trying to find the convoluted explanations and metaphors for everything. Speaking of which, let's talk about Wirt. Wirt is definitely not your typical kid. I mean, he loves to recite poetry and play the clarinet to himself. With this comes serious insecurities that we see bleed through in his discussion with Beatrice in episode 5. Elijah Wood perfectly encapsulates this through his execution of Wirt's lines. Upon a first watch, you wouldn't really pay attention to Wirt's poetry that he mutters throughout the series. However, dive deeper into the meaning of these lines, and these insecurities would reflect in the symbolism and metaphors that he uses.
I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm just like a boat upon a winding river, twisting towards an endless black sea.
One of my favorite parts of Over the Garden Wall is actually the For Sarah cassette tape. In it, Wirt will stutter and mumble, but ultimately he displays his true self, something that he can't let anyone see ever. The second he thinks he can get a chance, he takes it all back. This is why he can't handle Greg trying to just be his friend, despite being his stepbrother. Greg may be incredibly naive, but he wants to see his older brother open up. This is the dynamic that these brothers have, giving a deeper meaning to the Foyle tradition in typical writings. In Over the Garden Wall, you come to quickly realize that nothing is as it seems. Every episode has at least one surprise twist, no matter how big or small it might be. In episode 1, what we thought was the beast was actually just some corrupt dog under the spell of a black turtle. In episode 2, this pumpkin town was actually just a group of skeletons celebrating life after death. In episode 3, the gorilla on the loose was actually just Miss Langtry's infamous Jimmy Brown trapped in a gorilla suit. I could go on and list each and every single one, but there's no fun in that, honestly. What is fun and interesting, however, is finding the notion that nothing is really as it appears through the lines and scenes in the show that might go overlooked. In other words, a lot of foreshadowing and subtle nods form connections early on that would initially let the viewer know that things aren't how they seem. An example of this would be in episode 2, when Wirt actually looks for a phone and asks for a ride home.
Somewhere. Excuse me. Anyone here? Hello? Oh, sorry. I'm looking for a phone. I'm sorry.
It is here that Wirt alludes to not only the existence of a late 20th century / early 21st century world and elements from it, but that they come from a world different from that of the unknown. They are not native to these mysterious forests, which is not what you are set up to believe straight from the beginning of the show. You, as the audience, are thrown into this world with no explanation, causing you to feel just as lost as these brothers looking for a way home. The show is set in these strange, unknown woods with many mystical and fictional elements to it, like witches, skeletons, talking animals, a whole society of frogs, what? However, this kind of familiarity with mystical figures and creatures gives you a sense of comfort. It causes you to think that, though these brothers are lost, they are from a kind of world in which the supernatural is not unnatural. The viewers feel like it is safe to put their guards down, because nothing is going to significantly impact their feelings, since it's a super fairy tale, fictional, not relatable at all story, right? Wrong. This is why the reveal in episode 9 is just so impactful. These are characters we can relate to. They are from our world and can face our struggles. Wirt struggles with having a crush on a girl while failing to grasp the fact that people do like him and accept him. His self-doubt causes him to close himself off from forming connections with his peers. He leads himself to believe that Sarah could never like him, and that Jason Funderburker has her wrapped around his finger, and even that he wasn't invited to the party when in reality, everyone there would have been glad to have him there. Another escape of Wirt's, however, that many people will certainly relate to is escaping into music, which I will in fact use as my shameless transition into the next part, which is the music. The Over the Garden Wall score is one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard up to this day. Combining elements from all kinds of different genres and time periods allows for the series to feel like a super cozy period piece. Patrick McHale worked with the Blasting Company, of which brothers Justin Rubinstein and Josh Kaufman, to create the soundtrack. McHale had this to say about working on the music.
You know, the songs that we're writing for the series are sort of like reminiscent of old songs, but they're not actual old songs.
A lot of thought has been put into each and every song on the soundtrack to either make a scene give off the vibes it was looking for, or to even transition from one mood to another. I mean, Adelaide's Trap is one of my favorite antagonist themes I've ever heard, which primarily uses string instruments like the violin, which is fitting, to say the least. There were, however, tons of inspirations for the songs you hear in the show, some very obvious, some not so much. In episode 8, we hear a song called Old Black Train, performed by Justin Rubinstein. This song was heavily influenced by Woody Guthrie's Little Black Train. Have a listen.
There's an old black train a-comin', scraping along the iron. You don't need no ticket, boys, it'll take you when it's time.
There's a little black train a-coming, coming down the track. You gotta ride that little black train, but it ain't gonna bring you back.
Both songs tackle the topic of death and mortality, and very obviously with the analogy of a train being used. The last verse of Old Black Train says,
Now where this old train's going, you can't come back from. Leave your baggage here, because we'll need it when you're gone.
Where the train is heading, it's taking you to death, to meet your maker. Once you reach your destination, it's the end of the line for you, as well as the end of your life. You can't come back from death. Once you're gone, you're gone. Leave your baggage here, because we'll need it when you're gone. We need your memories to keep you alive within ourselves. We'll never see you again, so we can at least keep your baggage with us. You surely don't need it where you're heading. Alternatively, the song The Fight Is Over, which is actually sung by Pat McHale himself, is most closely related to Ballrooms of Mars by T-Rex.
The angels have gone, the songs have gone silent. You're sinking like a stone before the tide. You're gonna look fine, you're prime for dancing. You're gonna trip and glide out on the trampoline.
In this song, lead singer-songwriter Mark Bolan poetically discusses meeting once again with a loved one, most likely someone he lost either literally or due to a failed romance. The narrator of the song is longing to connect with this person who is oh so special to them, which is fitting for Wirt's desire for acceptance from and a relationship with his crush Sarah. Focusing on The Fight Is Over, the song takes a very literal stance to what is about to happen, with the lyrics containing a lot of foreshadowing. The angels have gone, the songs have gone silent. You're sinking like a stone before the tide. You're sinking like a stone. Very clearly alluding to the fact that Wirt and Greg are literally sinking in a river, dying, after avoiding the train, appropriately alluding back to Old Black Train. The river runs cold, the fight is over. Still the haunted ruins of night call your name. They're sinking further and further into the river, drowning and unconscious. They're losing the battle and are dying. They'll forever be lost souls stuck in the unknown. The haunted ruins of night calling out, the people from their homeworld looking for them. Their friends worried sick, finding them sinking to their death. This is the magic of writing, the magic of poetry, and the magic of music. It's the effect and meaning that songs that last less than 2.5 minutes can have on an already beautiful piece of art and literature, changing the game of animation for years to come. Speaking of changing the game though, I mentioned before this thing that Wirt created for his crush Sarah, conveniently named For Sarah. On it is a whole bunch of poetry and clarinet.
That tape has got poetry and clarinet on it, Greg. Poetry and clarinet!
Like I said before, the For Sarah cassette is probably one of my favorite things to ever come out of Over the Garden Wall. And not only is this because of Elijah Wood awkwardly whispering the sweet nothings of his teen angst poetry into my ears, but because the thought that was taken into crafting this 23-minute tape is immaculate. The best aspect of it is the inclusion of French-Polish composer Frédéric Chopin. Wirt has a clear admiration for Chopin, as he includes 3 different clarinet renditions of Chopin's pieces in the tape, among which is Chopin's most famous piece, Nocturne Opus 9, No. 2. Frédéric Chopin was crucial in defining what Romanticism was in the mid-19th century. He would introduce new possibilities and ideas for what Romantic music, and music as a whole, meant to not only the people of that time, but people in our generations. One of those people very clearly being Wirt. But who really was Chopin? I mean, personality-wise. Well, let's see. He was introverted and introspective. He found he was able to express himself in the arts, but at the same time found himself often leaning towards a more desolate mood, the cause of this being his declining health and his tendency to focus on the problems plaguing his art and his life. Does this ring a bell? Of course it does. Whether Wirt knew all of this or not, the showrunners clearly picked Chopin, of all composers, to be Wirt's inspiration for a reason. In art, you tend to look for things that you can relate your own emotions to. Something to give you the support you need to succeed on your own. Wirt is able to look at Frédéric Chopin and gain inspiration because it is what he can relate to. Much like how I and many other Over the Garden Wall fans can do the same with the show. Over the Garden Wall takes lots and lots of influences from many different sources and merges them all together to create one masterpiece. This isn't to say that Pat McHale just would have loved to plagiarize and steal from these already influential forces because he's an incredibly uncreative and unoriginal guy. No! It's because without all of those forces joining together in his wonderful, beautiful imagination, the show wouldn't ever be even half as good as it is today. We, as fans, can take the show and embrace it with open arms because we know that this is among the many influences that shape us. We know not to be as melodramatic as work. It's okay to get lost sometimes. You'll never know where you'll end up or who you'll end up with. Facing difficult topics such as death and loss can be painful, but you've just gotta have a solid rock sticking by you, and you'll be just fine. And last but not least, it is crucial to remember to be as sweet as potatoes and molasses.